Sairento VR is one of the old kids on the block. Developed by Mixed Realms and Swagsoft and entering early access on Steam in 2016, it's been on the VR scene for quite a while. Yet, before I got this game in a humble VR bundle, I couldn't remember seeing much discussion about it, so I didn't have any expectations going in. At first, I had to deal with a frustrating headset compatibility issue related to me using an HP Windows Mixed Reality headset, but after I sorted that out, I was hooked. Pulling off such fast-paced, fluid, and acrobatic movement in VR is something I haven't really seen any other title do so well. Combine that with a great weapon and loot system, and you have an excellent VR game on your hands. Let's get into it. In Sairento, you play as Cheiko, a cyber ninja working for the eponymous Sairento organization in a cyberpunk 2060s Tokyo. It's not really explained very well in-game what Sairento does, but the gist of it is that they are a clandestine government organization that promotes Japan's security. It's like the Japanese cyber ninja CIA. So, a series of terrorist attacks happen, and most of Sairento's agents have their implants hacked, which turns them into pawns for an unknown enemy, and provides you with your cannon fodder to slaughter. The story is serviceable, but if you're familiar with any cyberpunk works, you won't really be surprised by any of the themes or plot elements here. The voice acting is decent. It's what I would expect from an indie game where the story is not really the main draw. There are like 4 to 5 voice actors, but none of them really stood out as bad or amazingly good. It would have been nice to have a better story, but do remember that this game did come out a few years ago. Considering how we are only now just starting to get full-fledged story games in VR like Half-Life Alyx, I don't think anyone is really complaining that the story just serves as a way to introduce you to this world and the gameplay, which is really the main selling point. You really buy this game because you want to be a cyber ninja mans or womans and fly around killing dudes. So let's talk about the gameplay. Right off the bat, the most unique aspect of the game is the movement system. And whether you can get a handle on it early on will probably make or break the game for you. It takes a bit of practice to wrap your head around, but once you start integrating some of the more advanced moves into your play, you can fly around the battlefield in an absolute dance of death. This is one of those games that makes you feel like an absolute badass as you just float through the levels, sliding, wall running, and even flipping around enemies as you shoot and slash them. You heard me right, you can do flips in this game. It's a bit challenging at first since you have to do a very specific movement to activate it, and it's a bit finicky, doesn't always activate when you want it to, but it's so satisfying to successfully work into a combo. It's one of those things that when you first pull it off is going to elicit that holy shit, I just did that in VR feeling. But it might also make you feel like losing your lunch, so hopefully by now you've sussed out that if you get motion sick easily in VR, this game might not be up your alley just yet. I definitely recommend you have a good amount of experience in VR before you try this out. Also, if you have a low ceiling, definitely be careful when doing flips, cause I've smashed my controllers against the ceiling too many times to count. For that matter, you're just going to generally also want to be aware of your play space while playing this, as with any VR game with melee combat, you could easily send your controller through a wall if you're not careful. The game uses a combination of joystick movement for running on the ground and teleportation style movement for its more complex moves. As you get better at the game, you're going to mainly be using the former, and I think this works pretty well. You can do double jumps and later even triple jumps once you have unlocked the needed skill, and your jumps refill after hitting the ground, wall running or bouncing off a wall, so you can stay in the air for an insane amount of time. Using the different moves is pretty essential. The added mobility increases your survivability and lets you zip between enemies, separating heads before they even knew what hit them. The fake teleport is also an especially useful tactic. Basically, when you hold your jump button, bullet time is activated so that you can more easily aim where to go, but you can still shoot and stab while in this, so you can essentially get free bullet time as long as you hold down the button. The only downside is that this constantly drains your chakra, which is like your mana, and is used to perform all your movements, but it's not difficult at all to manage this. You can also activate bullet time manually with a separate button press, but it only gives you a specific amount of time, so I prefer doing it this way. Doing certain moves like the flips also automatically activates bullet time and gives you increased damage, so if feeling like max pain isn't enough of a motivator to do them, there's also that. Kills done with different moves grant you more XP, as well as allow you to chain combos better for even more XP. And this brings us into the RPG and looter shooter elements, which are surprisingly deep. Once you finish a mission, you'll return to the dojo, which serves as your main base and the game's menu. From here, you spec your skills, manage your loadout and relics, and take missions. Every time you level up, you gain a skill point that you can spec into any of the 10 or so skill trees. Most of these are simple stat boosts, but some of the early ones are really big, like unlocking the ability to triple jump or getting a charged range attack for your swords. I also really like that you can respec your skills at any time without cost. In terms of weapons, there's a good amount of variety here. It has a good balance between standard weapons and wacky ones. You have your pistols, SMGs, and assault rifles, but you also have kunai, ninja stars, rocket launchers, and laser rifles. I found that I did best with some of the more basic weapons like the mini SMG and the large magazine pistol, as being able to spray is much more forgiving than having to be precise while doing somersaults. However, I have to say some of the weapons just seem kind of fucked. Like, the thrown weapons make no sense. First of all, they aren't physics objects that you have to throw, you just trigger press and shake your hand and they're kind of shot out. Secondly, the way they're shot out is just weird and inconsistent. It felt impossible to actually aim these things. This is unfortunately one of the few ways that the game shows its age. When it comes to your loadout, you're able to carry 5 different weapons, 2 over your shoulder, 2 on your hips, and interestingly, 1 on your lower back. The only limitation is based on size, so you can only put assault rifles, for example, on your shoulder, and you can only put small weapons on your lower back like pistols. I recommend you always take at least 1 melee weapon. There are only 3 in the game by default without the DLC, and all of them are swords. That unupgraded, they all seem pretty similar. Nonetheless, the swords are really strong, look and feel cool to use, and you can deflect bullets like Genji. Do you need any convincing? While the weapon selection is what you would expect from a VR title, the relic loot system adds in a bunch of build variety and replayability. Doing missions nets you relics, which you can slot into your weapons and armor to modify their stats, like giving plus 10% damage or magazine capacity. Some of these relics even completely change how your weapons work. For example, I got one on my SMG that creates additional mirage forms when I hit criticals while dual wielding. There's also explosive tipped arrows and kunai, and I even got one that makes the plasma sword double bladed. Time to be scuffed General Grievous. There's even a form of crafting system where you can break down unneeded relics and use the money, as well as a resource gathered in missions, to roll for better gear. Overall, I found the relic system to be a pleasant surprise. Taking missions from the dojo is pretty simple. They randomly generate on the mission screen, and you can choose one to play or wait for them to refresh. There are over 25 maps and around 5 different modes to play. There's the classic elimination, where you take out enemies in an arena, Purge, where you have to clear a set of rooms, Assassination, which is the same as Elimination, except you have to fight a boss at the end, Survival, where you have to survive a certain amount of time, and Wave Defense, where you have to survive a certain number of waves. As you get better, the game will start recommending you harder missions, and you also have the option to increase the difficulty and add modifiers on top of this to net better rewards. There are also operations and endless mission types that give you additional rewards. Now, just for some general criticisms and suggestions I have. The music is good, but I wish there were more tracks. It does get quite repetitive after a while, and I'll probably just play my own music next time. In a similar vein, the enemy variety is pretty small. There are only around 8 or so, with only 4 of them being a real threat to the player. A few more enemy types could really help liven things up. Maybe a high mobility enemy that flies to better attack the player while they zip through the air. Quick note, there is multiplayer, but I've never seen an open game in the server browser, so I've never had a chance to play it, and I guess I can't really comment on it. If you are the 1% of people wanting to play the game for the multiplayer, I guess you'll be disappointed. When it comes to combat, I find that melee hits that don't immediately kill your opponent really lack weight. Your sword just kind of phases through the enemy, and since they kind of become tanky when you ramp up the difficulty, I'm not sure if melee combat in the late game would be super satisfying, although maybe I was just underleveled when I tried this. Quickly touching on the performance at the end here, it's good normally, but it doesn't handle recording or having programs like Google Chrome open in the background well. You might have noticed that the FPS of some of the gameplay in this video is pretty low compared to my regular standards, and this is simply because I couldn't find a way to make it display around 60. It's really weird too because when I was playing this, it was really smooth in-game, so it might have to do with how it's output on the desktop preview mode. If you're interested in my system specs that I was using to play the game, I have them in the description if you want to check that out. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the video that Sairento gave me a lot of trouble in my first few hours because I was using a Windows Mixed Reality headset, which isn't officially supported. If you own a Windows Mixed Reality headset, especially one of the first generation ones like mine, you know that typically the controls work just fine in cases like this because SteamVR works its magic and assigns a default set of controls to your controller bindings. However, with this game, I was struggling with god-awful controls, and it seems like many others with Windows Mixed Reality headsets were having this issue, according to Steam reviews. Walking was bound to touching my trackpad, which also handled jumping when you click down on it, and this was causing me to walk too slow or in the wrong direction and messing with the flow of my jumps. Considering how important movement is in this game, if you're going to have wonky controls, you're going to have a bad time. And I was, until when I was struggling to use SteamVR's unintuitive controller binding system. Man, I really hate the controller system. It just does not work, and it's not easy to use at all, but that's a side point. I noticed that there was a community binding made by another Windows Mixed Reality user who was in the same boat and undoubtedly smarter than me. It was a gift from Lord Gaben above. After activating these bindings and messing with the settings a little bit more in the actual game, I was much more comfortable, with my left thumbstick now controlling normal walking movement, while both my trackpads handled jumping and teleportation. And while I'm on the topic of controls here, I do want to highlight how this game has a very extensive settings menu where you can modify tons of things about how the game plays, from the controls, like which hand is your dominant hand, to gameplay like toggling on flips or making your weapons automatically reload. Having more settings is always a great thing, especially in VR where people want different locomotion styles and things like that, and this definitely helped with making my controls playable as well, so I really appreciated this. With an impressive movement system and a solid array of melee and ranged weapons to use to slash and shoot your way through enemies in bullet time, Sairento is a VR action game that works surprisingly well. If your stomach can handle it, you should definitely pick up this game if you're looking for a VR action shooter. There's just something about jumping between 3 enemies and slashing them apart without even leaving bullet time that just feels like this is what VR was made for. Combine that with a good variety of weapons and interesting and meaningful customization, and you have a recipe for a classic VR title. Thanks for watching the video, guys. If you enjoyed it and you want to see more VR game reviews, hit subscribe and the like button. I really appreciate all the support. Make sure you drink lots of water today, and I will see you guys in the next video.